It appears that the clock is running out on TikTok. Folks, let's talk about that. Last week, the U.S. House passed legislation that would essentially ban TikTok for U.S. users. Now, the specifics of it are this: the legislation demands that TikTok divest itself of its parent company ByteDance because of their connection to the Chinese government and Chinese law that could possibly require ByteDance to give user data to the Chinese government. If the TikTok did not divest itself from ByteDance within, I believe, 180 days, the legislation would require platforms like Google Store, Apple Store to remove the TikTok app from their platform so that no one could get it. Now, that wouldn't remove TikTok that anyone currently has, although legislation could be added that would force providers, IPs, from allowing it to be on their servers. So that's the legislation. And the most stated, the fundamental argument from Congress, and this is both parties, by the way, it passed overwhelmingly in the House, and there's apparently bipartisan support in the Senate. Not sure if it would make it or not. But anyway, the number one argument is that this is a national security issue, that China is a threat to the U.S., and that the possibility that they could get user information from people who use TikTok in the U.S. is a national security threat. And we'll talk about that. Let me start by explaining this disclaimer. I do not have TikTok. I don't know why I have a hard time saying this. I do not have the TikTok app. I've seen content that's been promoted on other platforms, but I do not have that. And I have friends that do, and I have some friends that actually make money through that app. So, that out of the way, the national security aspect is what is being promoted. Now, also, in the speeches and the discussions about why TikTok should go, there's talk about the content being disinformation, some obscenity, that the app is addictive, the effect on children, and so forth. But the number one issue is this national security issue. And as I said, it's bipartisan. President Trump, when he was in office, actually tried to have it banned. It didn't happen. Now, to be completely accurate, President Trump currently opposes this legislation. He does not believe, at this point, that TikTok should be banned. President Biden has stated that if this legislation were to make it through the House, that he would sign it. So the big thing is this security, national security threat. Now, many countries across the globe have banned TikTok from governmental phones and from government employees. I believe, I don't know if it's their personal phones, but their work phones. And this is not the first time. It's many places. And in our country, federal government passing legislation, and many of the states have passed legislation that the state phones or federal phones cannot have TikTok. TikTok. And to be fair, that makes sense. If there's a possibility that the Chinese government or any foreign government could access government databases, that could be a security threat. And there shouldn't be TikTok apps on those phones. Honestly, not only for security reasons, but just in general, I don't know if there should be social media apps on government phones at all. Now, I do know some governmental bodies do use social media, so perhaps. But I completely understand why you wouldn't have the TikTok app on a government phone. But this legislation would ban the use of TikTok by any American citizen. So my first question is, what is the security threat? What is the national security threat for the average citizen having TikTok on their phone? Let me just give you 4 examples. So Maisha Tyler, the nurse at the local podiatry office, or Franklin Winchester, a graphic designer at a local advertising agency, Yesenia Martinez, who is a machinist at a manufacturing company, or Lee Chow, who is a line cook at a local steakhouse. Let's say a couple of those people actually produce content. One a whole lot, one little, and the others just watch it. What is the national security threat posed by any of those individuals, or you and I, to having TikTok on our phones? I have not heard that delineated to express what the threat is for that being on someone's phone. So that's the first question I have. The second thing that I would like to discuss, in the legislation, they talk about the Chinese government spying on the user data. They talk about collecting user data as bad things. I'm not saying it isn't, but these are all things that our government currently does with all social media, and that the big corporations who own the social media or others also collect data. Ever been on social media? Ever been on the internet searching for, let's say, comfy socks, colorful socks, and then later going through your social media in the advertising areas, all of a sudden you get all these pop-ups, all these ads for colorful socks. What's being complained about with TikTok and the Chinese government is being done by big corporations and our government today. How is it different for TikTok doing it? Another aspect is TikTok has started creating something called the Texas Project, and there's also one for I think the UK and EU, where the data created in the use of TikTok in the United States would all be maintained on a cloud facility in the United States, accessible only by American citizens. And this would apply in, I believe it's UK and the EU. I think they're working on those. So TikTok has said, we're working on this, where all the information, all the data that this could create will be in the hands of Americans. Is that enough to allay the fears of this nebulous security threat? More importantly to me is, what is the constitutional authority that the federal government has to demand a private company change its ownership, and to demand that other private companies, for example, Google, Apple, to remove something from their store? What is the constitutional authority? The only thing I can think of is if this is a national security threat, there is probably some aspect that's constitutionally protected, which is interesting to me because I think that may be why we have a ill-defined national threat. We all believe in the security of our country. That's given. So I wonder if that might be why we're talking about the national threat. Folks, I'd love to hear your answers to any of this. I really would like to hear from anyone what the actual national security threat is. That's fundamental. For my friends who are concerned that the government follow the Constitution, where is the constitutional authority for the government to do this? The legislation has already passed the House. It's looking more positive than negative in the Senate, and the president has stated he will sign it. So what is the constitutional aspect of this? And then, isn't this the height of hypocrisy? We know our government is collecting data from every source, including social media. How is this any different? We disagree with the Chinese. We don't care for the Chinese. We consider the Chinese an enemy or a combatant. And I understand that aspect. But it seems a bit hypocritical. Finally, since we're talking about this, I want to make sure we don't just talk. Whatever your opinion is, whatever your position is on banning TikTok, please do something about it. We can talk on social media all day long, and nothing's going to change if we don't get out and do something. In this case, whatever your position is, to let your senators know and to talk to your representatives, because if it gets adjusted in the Senate, it might have to go back, and to let President Biden know what your position is on this. Having these conversations is good, but we need to let others know. Talk and action. One final thought that I wonder about. There is a move by former Treasury Secretary Mnuchin to collect some investors and buy TikTok from ByteDance. It would be American owned, sort of. And I wonder, does this have anything to do with that? All right, folks, until we get together again, get out in your community and make a difference.